Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. It's very moving for me to see so many of the faces of my friends and colleagues in that video. I'm honored to be invited to speak with you. In the last days of June 2015, I spent many hours in coffee shops and offices and restaurants in Beijing talking to many of China's notable activists. Wang Yu and I discussed the extraordinary nationwide attack on her reputation a few weeks earlier. Yu Wensheng described his unbearable torture at the hands of the security apparatus. Zhang Tianyong talked about the painful life of being separated from his family and having no permanent place to live. Li Heping imagined a society where compassion and justice and religious freedom were embraced by all leaders and citizens. In those last days of June, 3 years ago, what was their state of mind? They all knew that clouds were gathering. They all had suffered in the past, and they anticipated that they would be suffering more in the future. They all had hope that the signs of the deepening repression in the near future would be temporary. They all looked in the far future for a new China, which respected human rights, protected basic legal freedoms, allowed for an open political society, and the rule of law. Yet, none of them expected how quickly a storm was about to break over their heads. On the 9th of July 2015, exactly 3 years ago, a massive storm swept them all away. It began with Wang Yu's disappearance in the middle of the night. It spread rapidly over the next hours and days and weeks until more than 300 lawyers and activists across China had been detained or disappeared. Today, we remember the 709 crackdown, but we do more than remember. This is not an historical incident that is fading. It is not a monument to the past, only to be recorded in history books. This second day for China human rights lawyers show that the 709 crackdown is present, and it's present in this moment. It reveals to China's citizens, to lawyers across the world, to rights activists and the defenders of basic legal freedoms, to international organizations, and to states that still champion global standards of liberal constitutional orders, that a mighty struggle continues. The end is not near. Indeed, the struggle deepens inside China and across the world. And today we must ask 3 questions. We must ask, what does the 709 crackdown tell us about China and China's rulers? We must ask, what have we learned about China's rights lawyers and the struggle for freedoms inside China? And of course, we must always ask, what of the future? What does the 709 crackdown tell us about China and its rulers? What does it tell the world about the real China? Not the propaganda China, not the mythical China, not the face of China that the party likes to show the world, but the actual China, the empirical China, the China that free scholars and free media and free international organizations report without censorship. The world is waking up. The world is waking up to the dark side, the cruelty, the brutality of China's rulers. And we can see those in the way it treats its human rights lawyers. This is a China where a single person, such as Wang Yu, is humiliated nationwide in the state-controlled media. This is a China where brutalized lawyers are forced to make public confessions on national television and mouth wooden words far removed from the values they've expressed to me over many years of research and conversations. This is a China where authorities arbitrarily replace a lawyer's chosen counsel with a government-friendly substitute. This is a China we have seen that has expanded its repertoire of torture, intensifying and broadening the ways it seeks to break the ideals, the minds, even the bodies of China's own people. This is a China where lawyers are disappeared for weeks and months, and yes, even years, in so-called designated residential surveillance sites. So they are completely removed from families and lawyers and diplomats and the media and international organizations. This is a China where lawyers are subjected to new tortures, not least being forcibly injected with excruciatingly painful, disorienting drugs to alter their minds and to leave scars for the short term or the long term or possibly for the remainder of their lives. We've seen a China where brothers are compelled to pressure brothers and children are asked to act against their parents and parents against their children, or where wives are refused access or even knowledge to the whereabouts of their husbands. This is a China that has ratcheted up the charges and the sentences for detained lawyers. A China where secret trials have become a new norm for lawyers who most implausibly have betrayed so-called state secrets. The world is waking up to the recognition that China is a country that runs on the fuel of fear. China's leaders fear their own people. When we view China through the eyes of its criminal defense and rights lawyers, as I have done for many years, we see a fragile China. Across China, enormous grievances accumulate for hundreds of millions of people. Pollution and property takings, religious persecution and suppression of minorities, forced abortions and magnifying inequality, exploited labor and rampant corruption, unjust treatment by police and tainted air and food. China's leaders are afraid. They're afraid of civil society. They're afraid of Uyghurs and Muslims. They're afraid of workers and Tibetan Buddhists. They're afraid of unofficial Protestant churches. They're afraid of women, of unofficial Christian Roman Catholic churches. They're afraid of Hong Kong's fight for its legal freedoms and to maintain its open civil society. And of course they're afraid of Taiwan, a country that demonstrates that ethnic Chinese, that inheritors of the Confucian tradition, and that indigenous non-Han peoples together can build an open political society that adheres to global norms crafted in part by a pre-revolutionary China. And of course, they're afraid of foreigners who care about the dignity and the freedom of China's people. So the 709 crackdown casts a long shadow. The world now sees it as just one of many moves as part of many other againsts. Indeed, I would say the world is waking up to the fact that China is a deviant state. It deviates from universal norms on arbitrary arrest and detention, on torture and disappearances, on fair trials and an independent judiciary, on access to lawyers and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. The world has woken up to an awareness that this mighty nation, a nuclear power, a state exercising its military muscle, and an economic and geopolitical giant, nevertheless, is afraid of these few lawyers and the thousands that stand with them. What does 709 tell us about these few lawyers, these rights lawyers, and the thousands that stand with them? We've learned now that activist lawyers are spread across the country. There was a time when they were mostly concentrated in Beijing. Now they're everywhere. We've learned that the struggle for basic freedoms is now nationwide. In every region, ordinary people cried out for justice, for dignity, for their children, for safe food and clear water and pure air, for their property, for their religious beliefs. And rights lawyers responded. We've learned that rights lawyers fight for a core of ideals fundamental to all peoples in the 21st century world. They fight for basic legal freedoms. They demand procedural protections for their clients, such as the freedom to choose or meet with a lawyer, protection of clients from coerced confessions. They insist on standards of fairness in courts, such as seeing and cross-examining evidence. They want fair trials, and they want neutral judges. They fight for an open civil society where there is freedom of speech and association, including the ability of lawyers themselves to form their own independent associations free of the control of the state. They struggle for freedom of religion and protection from all religious believers, for all religious believers, including the savagely repressed adherents of Falun Gong. They want open exchanges of views and beliefs where citizens are free from stifling censorship. They also fight against the tyranny of a one-party state where all power is concentrated in the hands of a few supreme rulers. They insist that political power be divided. They insist that the tyrannies of absolute state power must be checked by law, and checked within the state, and checked outside the state. We've learned that lawyers' ideals are so strong that they will suffer terribly to maintain those ideals. We've seen that wives and daughters and sons, including those joining us today, have stood up to cry out for the most basic standards of justice and human decency. And most important, China's activist lawyers have shown the world that inside China's beating heart, there is an impulse for justice, for freedoms, for being part of a normal society. It is a society where rulers are not afraid of their own people, but they welcome the views of their people. It is a society where leaders do not fear lawyers, but welcome their peaceful respect for a just legality. Inside China's beating heart, there is a tiny minority that gives voice to wrongs and gives vision for the future. So what of that future? I submit to you that we already know the end of the struggle. What we don't know is when or how. For 25 years, social scientists and legal scholars and historians have investigated the role of lawyers in leading transitions to open political societies. These are societies where rights are embedded in constitutions and constitutions are implemented in practice. Again and again, across history and across regions, the best academic scholarship tells us that lawyers stand in the vanguard of change. Britain in the 1600s, France in the 1700s, Germany in the 1800s, India and Brazil in the 1970s, Egypt and Pakistan in the 1990s, and Zambia and Kenya, and not least in South Korea and Taiwan over the last generation, and in many other places between. Lawyers have fought against absolute monarchs, against big land regimes, against military dictatorships, against communist parties, and against fascist regimes. They wave the flag of legal rights, of civil rights, and of political rights. Time and again, lawyers and their allies, workers, women's groups, religious groups, the media, have been defeated. And time they have fought back from defeat. The struggle is never over, even in countries where liberal political ideals have been instituted for decades or centuries. Hope is still alive among China's rights lawyers. Now it is true as a dark hour, a moment when defeat seems possible. The darkness may last a long time, years, decades, even longer. But the end is never in doubt. Victories and defeats have already been the experience of China's lawyer activists, and defeats and victories will continue. Today, the second day for China human rights lawyers keeps hope alive. This event expresses a solidarity that crosses nationalities, that goes beyond citizenship, that binds together persons of every ethnicity and religious faith, that crosses continents and knits together peoples and organizations and states in every place. It is not only China's hope, but a universal hope, a hope in human dignity, a hope in human flourishing, in legal freedoms, in an open political society, in a future where all may worship as they choose, where every person may speak the language of his or her childhood, where all may honor the cultural traditions in which they were raised. This hope is maintained today by China's lawyer activists, and it's sustained by those that stand with them. Today, here, we honor them by standing with them for China and for all peoples anywhere who long for freedom and justice. Thank you.